Hey guys, how you doing? Anyone on the channel there?
Yes, we're here.
Ah, excellent. I just want to check all the audio's working and stuff. And
actually, while you're here, if this is the same ID you're going to log in with later, I'll make you a presenter so that when you come back in later, you'll already be one.
oh, great. Yes, it is indeed. Yes. So I'll be on for 11 o'clock or so.
Yeah. All right.
How are we doing this in terms of starting? Because it's 9 o'clock. Do I just start? Or are we doing intros or?
I'll do a quick intro.
Okay.
Okay. Welcome everybody to the Global Azure Virtual. This is our holding slide for our first speaker, which is Lise Carter. Welcome, Lise. Lise is going to do a session on Zero to Mobile Hero, as you can see on the screen, and I'll just hand straight over to you.
Thanks very much. So welcome everyone, and I'm very honoured to be the first speaker on track one of today's event, which I know from looking at the speakers and the content list is going to be an amazing day of content. So, as Sharon kindly said, welcome to my talk, Zero to Mobile Hero, an intro to Xamarin and cognitive services. It's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, as some of the subjects we're covering I could give whole dedicated day talks on. So this is quite high level, but hopefully it will just get you an idea to get started, keep you excited, to sort of have a play with it and see where you want to go from there. So this is your average geek. You know, they do a bit of, you know, tinkering with different things in their spare time, but they also know a bit of programming. And they've had an idea. Like most people, or a lot of people around the world these days, you know, we have smartphones in our pockets, and we might want to start actually doing things with the smartphones in our pockets, maybe making apps for it to show off to our friends. And that's where, you know, you might want to start using something like a language that you know. So a lot of us might be .NET developers, and so we might know certain languages, what have you. So we might want to use .NET to get started. So one of the options that you've got for writing apps for your mobile phone in C# or the .NET framework is, or .NET ecosystem, sorry, is something called Xamarin. So the traditional Xamarin approach involves a shared C# backend. So that would be, you know, your shared business logic and you know, all the sort of the data, the models, anything like that that you're used to, all the business logic kind of things is done there together. So that would mean that you can share your code across different platforms, because all Xamarin really is a thin C# wrapper around the native SDKs and build tools. So once you actually get down to the nitty-gritty, it's exactly the same build tools and low-level languages that would be used natively if you were doing it the traditional way with something like Swift, Objective-C, Java, or Kotlin. But it just means that you can make the most of the C# and you get the same look and feel across the platforms, which is great. But the problem with the traditional traditional Xamarin approach, as you can see here, is that you still have to do the UIs for each platform. So you still need some knowledge of how to do what's called storyboarding in iOS. And then you've got Android XML for Android. And then if you want to do UWP as well, it's a UWP dialect of XAML. So you still need that knowledge, and that still takes time. And in a world where you want to be, you know, the first to market with your competitors, that slows you down. So a few years ago, quite a few years ago now, something that Xamarin introduced, and is my personal favorite, is something called Xamarin Forms. So what Xamarin Forms is the same shared C# backend and business logic that you'd have in your traditional approach, but it also shares the UI code, which means that you no longer need to worry about doing, you know, the storyboarding or the AXML or the XAML files. You just write the shared UI. You've got two options for doing this. This is either writing it in code, so C# UI as code, as it's called in C#, or the most common and popular one is XAML. It's not quite the same dialect as a UWP XAML, but they are very similar, and so they're both, you know, very intuitive to get started with. So it means that you're already saving time by being able to have the shared UI. But as I mentioned before, it is just a thin wrapper around the native components and build tools and what have you. So when it comes to actually deploying it, once it's on your mobile phone, it looks, or device, not just mobile phones. Xamarin does actually support beyond smartphones. Also supports like Xbox, watches, so watchOS, tvOS, so Apple TV and Apple Watches. Samsung also have a great relationship with Microsoft and Xamarin and develop a lot of ties and things. So that's Samsung Gear watches and Samsung TVs. But as I said, it is the native. It is, once it's down to the low-level code, it's identical to native. So you'll get identical look and feel. So you wouldn't know whether the apps that you're producing or develop using Xamarin or native. It's just the native look and feel. So that's, that's really positive. So we've learned about what Xamarin is, but how do we get started? What tools do we need to start developing these apps? Because we're developers, we have different tools and opinions on tools and what have you, but we want to know what choices we've got. So you've got, when it comes to writing Xamarin code, you've got three options. Now, I know there's only two here. I can count. We'll come on to why the third one is missing later. So the first one on the left here is, you might recognize as Visual Studio for Windows. So out of the box, you get Xamarin support as long as in the Visual Studio installer, if you tick the mobile workload, as long as that's ticked and it installs all the tools, that'll give you everything you need out of the box from Community Edition, no money required. You have all the tools you need to get started. So that's the, the SDKs you need, any emulators that might be useful. So the Android SDKs and all that stuff. All the stuff that you need will come out of the box if you tick that box in the installer. The limitation to Visual Studio for Windows, of course, is that out of the box, you can't easily do iOS. So if you create a new project, it will not give you iOS as it will give you iOS as a project, but you won't be able to build and run it on your machine without the use of a Mac. This is due to a limitation imposed by Apple, where they ask you to you have to use the Xcode build tools in order to compile the code and then deploy it to a device. So that's obviously a disadvantage, but there are ways around it. If you've got a Mac at home already, you can just connect to it over the network with Build Agent, as it's called. It will talk to it over SSH and it will do the work for you. There's even support for things like bringing the iOS simulator that's running on your Mac, bring the window over to Windows out of the box. So you don't even need to have a screen or be sat at your Mac at the time. As long as your Windows machine is connected to it, you're good to go. If you don't have a Mac available, there are cloud-based solutions available, such as Mac in Cloud, where you can rent build space in the cloud with a Mac, and you can tell it what kind of things that you need, and it will go ahead and build it for you. That does require a little bit of setup, but it is still very straightforward. So, don't worry that if you don't have access to a Mac, you don't have to put hundreds of pounds down to buy a Mac. So if you've got access to a Mac, that's nice and easy with the Mac Build Agent. But apart from that, everything that you'd want out of the box, you can even set it to be not just iOS and Android, but also UWP will be an option to be created. What's cool as well is that they've done a lot of work around the Mac tooling on Windows. So you can, if things like your versions are mismatched, so maybe your mono installation on your Mac machine is out of sync with Windows, it will bring the boxes over to your screen and say like, hey, this is out of date, or you need to accept this license agreement. You can just click go and it will go ahead and do everything you need, again, without needing to connect to your Mac, apart from obviously the Mac Build Agent, but you don't need to physically connect to your Mac. There's also been a lot of work going on with something called Xamarin Hot Restart, which means that although for releases and certain deployments, you will need access to a Mac, but one of the great things they've done with Hot Restart is do it so that the amount of times you need to be connected to a Mac is minimized. So actually now you can directly connect an iOS device into your Windows machine and debug on the iOS phone right there in your hand without needing to connect. And that's quite exciting in the Xamarin world because that was only introduced recently. So that's Windows. So then the other image you've got there on the right is Visual Studio for Mac. So this started life a long time ago as Mono Develop on a Mac. Then it got rebranded as Xamarin Studio. And then in 2016, when Microsoft acquired Xamarin, work was started to kind of merge the two together so that Visual Studio features were moved over to Mac. So obviously, as well as being good for Xamarin development, you can now do, you know, .NET Core, and it has the Roslyn analyzer and compiler and whatnot built in. So it's really come a long way. Unfortunately, you can't do UWP on a Mac because there's no such thing as a Windows build agent like there is for the Mac. So if you want UWP, you can either develop on Windows or do what I do sometimes, which is create the project on Windows, push it up to version control, and then jump on my Mac. It will mean that the UWP project you can't run on your Mac, but because it's shared business logics and shared UI, you can carry on developing your project knowing that apart from maybe some tweaks you might want to make later, you can just carry on and run UWP from a Windows machine later. As I mentioned earlier, there are 3 choices. And as I mentioned, I can count. The reason that one is missing is because the third option is Rider from JetBrains. So Rider is, I believe, is a spin-off from IntelliJ. So it's JetBrains' own IDE. I've heard really positive things about it from not just .NET developers, but also Xamarin developers. The reason I left it off here is just because I've not used it myself. So although I've heard positive things, I don't know enough about it to stand here and tell you any of the ins and outs in terms of useful things to know about it. But if you do like Rider already, just to let you know, it is an option. So now we're left in a quandary. We know that we want to use Xamarin because it allows us to use the .NET ecosystem that we know and love to develop our applications. But we've got a choice. We know what tools we want, that we need to get started. But now we have another choice. Now, if any of you watching are musically inclined, you will recognize the highlighted notes as C# and F#. The reason I did that is because, as you may know, 2 of the languages in .NET are C# and F#. Because actually, Xamarin supports both, and possibly Visual Basic, but don't quote me on that. Just stick to C# and F#. So if you're a functional programmer and you write in F#, Xamarin is still an option to you. So you still can use .NET, but you don't have to use C#, which is fantastic. So enough talking about Xamarin. Let's actually write some code now. So if I just switch over to Visual Studio, let's just quit out here. Visual Studio wants to show typical. It's always live demos, isn't it? I should have made a sacrifice to the demo gods this morning. That's fine. Let's do that. There we go. So what we've got here is a brand new project. I'll just minimize all of these for now. Don't worry what they are. So this is a brand new out-of-the-box Xamarin Forms project. So in Mac, it's just File, New Solution, and then there's an option for blank Forms app under multi-platform app. So this is where you can pick the languages. This is completely out of the box, blank, as far as I know. We'll find out. So because I created it on the Mac, you can see here that we've got 3 projects. We've got iOS and Android. So these are both what we call project platform, sort of platform projects or project sort of specific. Don't worry too much about these, but if you've ever done any native development, you'll recognize the structure of the project. You've got the info plist, which just does things like the app name and version number. Entitlements plist just lists what you've got access to. So it's completely the same as native. It's in C#. And then you've got the app delegate, which don't worry too much. This might look a bit scary if you've not seen this before. But the main thing to note here is out of the box, it already initializes Xamarin Forms and then says load a new app, which we'll see shortly what that is. So that's the iOS project. So that means that you can target that and it will run your app as iOS. Then you've got Android. Again, it's the layout that you'd expect if you've ever done Android development. You've got your resources with your layout. Then you've got your drawable folders where your images go. Main activity, a bit like the app delegate. Initializes Xamarin Forms and loads the app. So if you ever want to do anything that you can't do shared, which is becoming rarer and rarer these days in terms of components, that's where you go to start, the platform projects is where you go to do those custom renderers. But as I said, there's so many shared components now, don't worry about it. Just wanted to talk you through what you see in a new project. If you created this on Windows, you might see .uwp as well. But the main thing to look at here is this project here, which we call the shared project. This is just a .NET Standard 2.0 project, which is super helpful. And it means that you can, it's just .NET Standard. So if you've got any other projects that work with .NET Standard or code that you want to share, you can, bring that in as a project and it will be supported. The main things to look at here are the app.xaml.cs. So if you've ever done ASP.NET MVC, you might be familiar with this idea of partial classes. I believe is it Razor Pages? Is it CSHTML.cs or something? But yeah, don't worry too much. Basically, every XAML page comes with a partial class. In this case, this is the app that we're referring to. So in the platform level, when it said, hey, go and make this app, new app, that's what this was calling. And all this main page is doing is setting the root page of our application. So that's where this main page comes in, and we've got it out here. So if we load it, as I mentioned before, one of the things you can do with Xamarin Forms is write your UI in XAML. So this is fairly straightforward. If you've ever done UWP, this might look quite familiar. We have got the content page, so that's just the outline. We declare some namespaces, but again, that's all out of the box. This is just the code that you get out of the box. But we're going to make some changes now. So one of the sort of apps that you might want to make, and is a good starter, is a counter. And counter's quite useful, especially say at the moment we're in lockdown. Maybe you want to get some exercise. You maybe want to make a makeshift basketball hoop in the garden, and you want to just get some exercise alone by playing a bit of basketball. You might want to keep count of the amount of points that you've scored in your practice. I don't know about you, but I know, just ask my personal trainer, when I do too much exercise, my brain, or when I start to exercise, my brain goes. So I focus on the exercise, and counting would be too difficult. So let's just make some simple changes to this app to see how you get started. So stack layout is just declaring the layout of the file. Stack layout is one of the most common, and it's just a either vertical or horizontally aligned stack. So each component that you add, it's kind of one on top of the other, unless you set the orientation to be horizontal, and then it will do it side by side, obviously to the right of each other. As you saw there, Visual Studio for Mac's even got IntelliSense built in now, which is fantastic. So let's just make this counter app. So we don't want to say welcome to Xamarin Forms anymore. We're going to want our count to start at 0. We're going to want to stick this in the middle. I'll worry about that later, but we'll see how it looks. So we've got the text here. We maybe want to give it a text color. So we'll give it, normally when I do this, I get people to pick, but we're going to pick pink. Why not? Let's do hot pink. So we've got the text. Again, all these attribute names are very intuitive. We maybe want to make the font size bigger because we want to be able to see it. Let's do 72. We've set the text, we've set the text color, and if you hover over it, you can see you're getting a tooltip, which is helpful. That's actually using an amazing productivity extension called mFractor. So most of you will know ReSharper on Windows, which is fantastic, but ReSharper obviously isn't on a Mac. So you can get something called mFractor for Visual Studio for Mac, which is fantastic for Xamarin development. So we've set our font size, but we maybe want to give it a name because we're going to want to reference it at some point. Let's give it a name. We'll call it count label. That's pretty straightforward. So we've got our label, but now we want a button because we want to actually click a button that makes it get bigger. So we'll set the text to be increment. Now we'll do our score because we're playing basketball. Font size to be fairly big, and then we just want to do if it's clicked what happens. So we'll do Yeah, there we go. Cool. So so that's just saying when we click it, call this method here to, actually handle what happens. But you're probably thinking, well, what does happen? Where is it looking for that? And that is where these partial classes come in. So if we open up this here, let's just delete here's what I prepared earlier. No one saw anything, gone, bye. There we go. So apart from the code that I've forgotten to delete when I was testing it this morning, this is just what you get out of the box. So it's just initializing those components, which is part of Xamarin Forms. So if we think about the count, what kind of things we're going to want to need? Well, the first thing we're going to want is something to keep score of accounts. So we'll do int count equals 0. And then we just want to handle what happens when it's clicked. So if we do that increment, so it's going to be public void increment counter clicked. And when you do it, it's just, I will explain this in a second. It's okay. There we go. So let's have a look at the quick fixes. There we go. Yeah. So if you're wondering what this is, so when this method is called, some information is passed to it. So the sender is the object that's calling that method. So in this case, it would be a button. And then event args e is just for handling any data that you maybe want to pass around when the button is clicked. In our case, we don't need to worry about that, but that is what the signature of the method needs to be. So we just want to say increase the count by 1. And then set that label text to be that button. So each time you click it, it goes up and the label's updated. So count label text is going to be that count as a string. Pretty straightforward, a few lines of code. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and set up a run configuration for this. So if we go to options, and it brings up the solution options, there's configurations. I've created one called multi-platform, which targets both projects, which means that we can go ahead and deploy both projects at the same time, which means it will load iOS and Android together. Because if you think about it, you won't want to run the project, then have to stop it, then restart it just to see what changes you've made, because you might want to see both at the same time in terms of what's happening. So if we go ahead and click run now, this will start off the build process for both platforms and the solution, and then start outputting it. You can see here it's just building the 3 items at the top. The first time you do it, it can take a few minutes, depending on your machine, but an Android has historically been the slowest, but they've been doing a lot of work with Google to try and improve those times, because a lot of the time the slow Android stuff is to do with the tooling rather than Xamarin. So I know a lot of the time people get frustrated or impatient and then, oh dear, I've upset something. What have I done? Okay, this is what happens when you run old code, but that's fine. We can do here's what I prepared earlier. So if we jump on here, right, this was fine earlier. Well, how's it gone? I think slowing down now. Come on. Let's just clean this all. If it doesn't work, I'll just load the iOS simulator where I've got a version of this running already. But yeah, it's very straightforward. A few lines of code will generate an app that works across platforms. just move this over to here. There we go. So this is just while we wait for that to sort itself out. Is that going to work? I have too many counters, you see. Live demos. Who do them? Oh, thinking about it. Oh, that's okay. See what it's up to. Okay, we'll just target iOS for now then, and just to speed it up. But yeah, obviously this is, as you can see, it's got updates to it, for example. So if you are doing this out of the box, this kind of thing won't happen. I was just scared to update in case things broke, which never really happens. When you're doing live demos, you become very, very pessimistic and cautious. There we go. There we go. It's starting the iOS simulator, no problem. So if we bring this simulator across. Oh, it's on the wrong screen. How do we? Here we go. I should bring that up. So that's just loading now. It's just starting up. This is a cold start, so it'll take a few minutes, but this MacBook's a few years old, so if you've got a more modern laptop or got more RAM and things, this will happen a lot faster. There we go. So it's just thinking about it. There we go. Cool. So it's just, so I didn't set the layout properly, which is obviously something you'd want to do. You'd want to just tell it to be further down the screen if you've got more content than just this, otherwise it's getting squished. And there is something that you do with iOS 11 phones and later to deal with the notch, but as you can see, it works. So if we stop this and then switch to a different iOS, for example, doesn't matter which iPhone simulator you're using, it will just work. But as you saw, it's just a few lines of code and boom, we had a count working. You click the button and it went up by one. It was that nice hot pink color that we picked. So we'll just give that a minute and then we'll move on. But what's cool is that, you know, this was so easy to do. I mean, I know because it's a demo and I'm also obviously sharing my laptop screen at the same time, so it's using up some resources. It was still pretty quick. And, you know, I didn't even need to own an Android device or an iOS device. And it worked, which is great. So there you go. It's just loading up the other one now. And you'll see it will look the same. If you've ever done native development or seen, you know, quite simple iOS apps before, you'll see that it had exactly the same look and feel as you'd expect, with the transparent buttons with the blue writing. Yeah, because I hadn't customized that button at all. So you just got the same things that you get out of the box if written natively. While we do that. See, when I do this in this is the first time I've delivered this content as a virtual event, which is quite new. But often I tell really bad jokes when I do this live. I think a lot of people groan at my dad type jokes. I will just give that a minute. But once this is started, it's obviously already running, so you won't have to worry about cold start again. So if you're doing this kind of development yourself at home, it's, yeah, once you start the simulators and stuff from cold, leave them open, and you know, it's the sort of the time to build and deploy loop is almost instantaneous. Yeah, I own an iPhone, so I could use my iPhone to test on when I'm doing development a lot, but to be honest, unless I really need to test something, the only device that can do, I will stick to using the simulator because it's so much quicker. Right, we'll wait for that to load. Oh, there we go. So we'll just wait for that to load. Cool. So you can see exactly the same look and feel, just different device. Cool. So the other thing that we can do is have a look at F#. I mentioned that it supports F# as well. So if we stop that, we can just quickly switch to the F# version. So this again will look very familiar. The main page is written in XAML. Apart from a couple of syntax changes here for the button click and the text, the majority of it is identical. If you have a look at the F# side where the business logic is, so this uses, I need to update this package, but I'm scared to, but it's now called Fabulous. But the great Don Syme, the benevolent dictator of F# and an absolute genius, he's been working with the Xamarin team at Microsoft to nurture the marriage between Xamarin Forms and F#, which resulted in this Fabulous library, or as it used to be called, Elmish for Xamarin Forms. So that allows you to bring in MVU, which is Model View Update, which is a popular architecture in F#, and allows you to use that with stateless, immutable to do your applications. But it's still pretty simple. You know, you can increase it by 1. You can decrease it by 1. I know F# can look a bit scary to anyone that's not seen it before, so don't worry too much. I just wanted to show you that it's still very easy to get started in both languages on the platforms. And when you run it, it would have the same look and feel as you'd expect. So if we jump back to the slides now. Slides, there we go. Let's just do it from here. So we've seen a demo in C# and F#. And it's great to do a simple counter app, but maybe you want to do something a bit more exciting. And that's where something called cognitive services comes in. So what are cognitive services? Microsoft Cognitive Services, formerly Project Oxford, are a set of APIs, SDKs, and services available to developers to make their applications more intelligent, engaging, and discoverable. I took that from the Microsoft docs, and that is total marketing spiel. I mean, what does that even mean? So let's have a quick look. So if we jump over now to browser, I'll just bring the window across. So there you go. Zoom in a bit. So here we've got the what's called the Cognitive Services directory. So yeah, Cognitive Services is a comprehensive family of AI services and cognitive APIs to help you build intelligent apps. And it does loads of great things. So if we have a look here, it should be a nice, here we go. So it comes under what I like to call the 5 pillars. So you've got, let's just zoom out slightly. Here we go. So you've got, a lot going on this page. Here you go. So the 5 pillars are decision, language, speech, vision, and web search. So decision, yeah, things like anomaly detection, content moderation. So you can use AI and cognitive services to look for stuff like bad language or, you know, anything naughty. Then you've got language. So yeah, you've got immersive reader, which is in preview, language understanding, Q&A maker. So if you run a business, for example, where you maybe want to make your FAQs a bit more interactive, that's where Q&A maker comes in. Text analytics, which we'll see in a minute, because I'm going to tell you a story, that detects sentiment. So there's loads of different things that you can do around language, speech, so speech to text, text to speech, translation. Yeah, really powerful things, even speaker recognition. So you can start using the power of AI to get started, which is great. And then there's things around vision, so you can analyze content, There's face detection, where you can even detect emotions. So when I was looking through all this, and seeing some of the things that you can do with vision, and then there's web search, so you can take advantage of the different types of searches you can do in Bing, so not just text, but auto suggestions, images, video searches, news, even spell check, all those things all built in. And around the time that I was reading about all this stuff, I had an experience. So I was playing a 12-hour board game with some friends from work, and it was really fun. But the thing with the game is that any game that is that long is very complicated and there's a lot going on. But this game involved trade and negotiations, and being able to read people is very useful. And I got reminded that day of just how poorly I can read people, because sometimes I struggle to read body language. And so I was reading about this stuff and I was like, oh, because I was playing this game and I was trying to negotiate with a friend, and I said, right, I'll give you the next technology I research that you don't have if you leave me alone and don't invade my space and wipe out all my characters. And he just sort of just sat there and looked at me, and I thought he nodded and agreed with me. No. Next round, he invaded me. Thankfully, I just about survived, but it wasn't good. So when I was reading about this stuff, it made me think about that story. And I thought, you know what? I can develop an app that can help with this. And the two things that kind of jumped out at me were language and speech. Vision. Because I thought, oh, I can get someone to have a look, analyze the pictures of emotion so I can learn about it and things like that. So I actually went ahead and built an app called Body Language Assistant. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now so you can see this in action. It's a cool app. I'll show you it in action and I'll show you how it was done. So I'm just going to share my phone screen with my laptop. Bear with me. There we go. There we go. So this is the app. This is my personal mobile phone. So this is just the menu. It's a pretty simple looking app, but we'll start off with text. So in 2018, I was very lucky to get given a ticket to go to Microsoft Build, their annual conference in Seattle. And while I was there, I watched a friend of mine, Brandon Minnick, give a talk on cognitive services. And he was using an example of a message from his boss, where he was trying to sense if his boss was being sarcastic or was cross at him about something. And I got it completely wrong. So when I was thinking about this app, I remembered that story and I thought, yeah, this could be quite useful. So I put in this sentiment analysis. So we can just do something pretty simple like Azure is the best. Click analyze and boom. In an instant, it's gone off, analyze the sentiment and come back. And yeah, it's positive. Cool. Let's do something bad. I don't know. COVID-19 is the worst. We all know that. Cool. So as you can see, the response is quite sarcastic. That, of course, is me being sarcastic because, as you can imagine, it's machine learning, it's computers, it's very, very powerful. But it can't obviously do sarcasm, but you can, handle the results as you wish. So in my case, I decided to be sarcastic, and then we could just do something different. So I don't know, John Smith. Yeah, you seem normal to me. So pretty straightforward stuff. So we can have a look at how that was done, and then I'll show you the other cool feature, my favorite in the application. So we can come out of here. If you ever do that. So if we come back to here, what we're going to do is we're going to load the code and have a look how it's put together. So this is all done using Xamarin Forms and Azure. So if we have a look here, so this is using the MVVM architecture if you've not seen it before. So it's similar to MVC and ASP.NET, if you know that, But it's just the idea that you've got views, which are just the pages, the view models, and then act as the kind of in-between messenger between any helpers, services, or models that you've got lower down. So it starts off with that main page, which is just, like we saw earlier, a simple stack layout with some buttons. When you click the button, go off and call these methods. This uses binding, so that's data binding, which is very powerful in Xamarin Forms. It just allows you to tie data in the views to data in the back end, so that if it's updated, the UI automatically updates. So that's just the menu. If we just close everything and come into here, you've just got the analyze texts. So it's just a layout with the label, the editor with that background color set, and a button. Very straightforward. Then in the view model here, you've got some public properties and backing fields for them. So the text for analysis is just what you write in the box. We set up the command so that when the button's clicked, you go off and call a method that we've got further down. So if we scroll down now, these are just the different colors and the results. And then here we go. So this is the start of what you saw before. So it goes off and does some text analysis, which we'll look at in a second, and then does a switch case. So based on the sentiment result it gets back, that's where it decides what to say and sets the color. So that analyzer is something that I've got here in this text analyzer class. So it's all just C#. There's nothing fancy going on. So when it comes to interacting with Azure services or Cognitive services in this instance, you've got two choices. You can either use REST or you can use the SDKs. So for the text analysis, I used REST and just create the HTTP client. A lot of the code in this class is just setting up the HTTP client message, request and handling the responses. The actual Cognitive services side of it is pretty small, so that's fantastic. So we've got the content here. We're just setting it up, so we just add our Azure API key. But the main thing is you call this analyzer, and this you bring in the text that you want to analyze. So this sets up the body, and don't worry too much about this. All this code is on GitHub, so if you want to have a closer look, you can. But the main thing here is it gets back the response and then starts to handle that response. So it converts it using Newtonsoft. So again, all just standard C# stuff. Checks for errors, and if there's no errors, it then starts to do some handling of the result. It orders it in terms of the highest, most likely sentiment, and then works with that, and then returns that sentiment that you saw. So yeah, fewer than 80 lines of code in this class, and the majority of it were the setting up of the HTTP request. So it's just really powerful and really simple to get started, and that's what I love about Cognitive services, is just how approachable it is. And then we've got the next feature, which I'm most proud of. So if we share my phone screen again. Quickly, let's just do this now. Okay. Make that pop up. 6535. There we go. Cool. So if we go back to here, so we've got this analyze body language. So as I mentioned, my biggest struggle is understanding people and reading body language. I am terrible at it. I mean, I'm better than I used to be, but unless it's really obvious, I'm not always sure. So I developed this app. So it allows you to take a picture that it then analyzes. So we can take one right now. Let's put it facing me. Do a silly picture. Yeah, we can do better than that. Let's do a smiley one. There we go. Oh, I need a haircut. Lockdown. So we can use that photo. So it's going ahead and it's looking for the faces in the picture. Boom. Most likely emotion, happiness with a score of 1. Woo. So what does it mean, most likely with a score of 1? So you know, machine learning can never give you a definitive answer. All it can give you is a probability score of what it might be, you know, whatever it is that you're, you know, not just emotions, but anything. So in this case, a happiness with a score of 1 is equivalent of 100%. So this picture is sure that I'm 100% happy. And, you know, that's pretty cool. So we can close my phone and let's have a look at how it was done. Let's just get rid of that. So if we go back to the code, we can have a look how it's put together. So this one has a bit more going on, but it's still pretty straightforward. In the views, you've just got the take photo button. Then you've got the image so that you saw the resulting image appear. And then at the bottom, we've just got this grid with a visibility toggle. So that was the, you know, if it's looking for the faces, then you saw it there with the spinny wheel. Now this one's quite clever. This one uses the SDK. So you can see here it's called in the SDK. You've got the setting up there. So one of the cool things that developers have done for Xamarin Forms projects is create NuGet packages and libraries, because there's some native features that you might want to use. In this case, taking a picture, but it might be things like checking for the battery life or checking internet connectivity, all those kind of things. How you'd write the code to achieve those things on each platform is different. And so really smart, kind, generous people have written libraries to make that easier. So you don't have to worry about writing at the platform level how you do stuff like take a picture. All you need to do is call that library from your shared project and it will handle the rest. So in this case, we're using a media plugin from James Montemagno, who is now the principal program manager lead for mobile tools at Microsoft. So very smart guy, also extremely nice. And so the library, a lot of the work going on in here is actually from his library just to take the picture. The cognitive services side of it, again, is very minimal. And that's pretty impressive in a class with, again, around 80 lines of code. So we set up the taking of the picture. Then we set up that face client that we want. So that's part of the vision, the custom vision SDK from cognitive services. We just give it the Azure keys that it wants, the API key, and then set the URL. And then we start to take the picture. So this is pretty straightforward stuff. Again, this is just properties and backing fields, because that's very common when you're writing Xamarin Forms MVVM projects. So we take the photo, set it to as busy, and just ask it to go and take the picture with a small photo. Once we get it back, that's when we convert the type of object that we get back from the library to something that then can be displayed on the page. So you get the image back. Then it sets up the face side of things. So you've got the face operations, then you've got the attributes. So we're saying, okay, when we ask for the face, what things do we care about? So we will get back everything. So we've just asked it to give us everything, but it might be that you're only very specifically wanting to look for one type of emotion. So it might be passport photos, for example. You're not allowed to smile in a passport photo. So you might want to be doing a check that if they're smiling in the picture, reject the photo. Then we just say, give us the faces by calling this face operations, detect the faces, and then give it the attributes that we're looking for. If we get back the results, then we want to move to this image page. You can see it here, image result page. So in the helpers, we have this emotion analyzer that we call. And what that's doing is just setting up the options that it needs. So if we get back this image result and we call the view model, we're passing in that the faces that we got back and the photo. So then we can start doing things with it. So as you saw from that page, we've said this is your photo and this is the most likely emotion. So passing in the photo is so that we can display it. Again, we just stick it up on the page. But the interesting bit here is just the emotions and the faces. So we're just saying get the emotion for the face, which is down here. We've set up a key value pairs dictionary. So we're saying that this is the name of the attribute and the value. So that's how we know that it's happy or it's sad or angry, or, you know, we just build up that key value pair for all the possible emotions that you can get back. So as you saw, there's more than just happiness, there's anger, fear, sadness, surprise. So there's lots of options. So we get those back, and then we do some ordering on it. So we're just saying whichever is the highest, so the first in the list when you order it descending, return that back. And that's how we got back that most likely emotion. And then we just set the screen to have that most likely emotion. So yeah, again, even this class has, what, 50 lines of code. So overall, this whole application has maybe 200 lines of code maximum, and only about 50 lines of that is the cognitive services side of things. So it's just super powerful and super awesome. And that's just something simple I've done with cognitive services. Oh, that's not on screen. There we go. You can also do some great things with it. So I just quickly want to show you some examples of how cognitive services have actually been used to save lives. So if we just jump back into here.
Luce, can I just interrupt slightly and
Yep.
just give you your 5-minute warning?
Yep, no worries. Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on the time. We're almost done. So just quickly want to go through these examples here. So this is a skin cancer prediction app, which uses machine learning, Core ML, and Xamarin together. So this
apologies,
is very...
Luce, we can't see your screen currently.
Oh, that's no worries. I can share it again. No, that one. There we go. Cool.
It looks like that's
Sorry about that.
working.
Yeah. So this is just a blog post, which I can share a link to later if you want to read it. But it's just showing how they put together a skin cancer prediction app and how they did it. So they talk about training the models, and then you've got this using Xamarin to actually develop the application. So there's lots of stuff here, but I just want to scroll down to the image, because what this is doing is allowing you to use machine learning with Xamarin to do skin cancer prediction. So you imagine that you're a doctor, a consultant who specializes in things like skin cancer. You'll be looking at these images, hundreds of these images every day, to have a look whether you should be concerned about a lesion or a mole on a patient's skin. But humans get tired, humans make mistakes. And so by using the power of machine learning and cognitive services and Xamarin, you're able to develop an app where they're not going to, the computer's not going to get tired, and you can process these images so much quicker. So potentially a patient that does need to have their, skin issue looked at closer, who potentially may sadly have cancer, could get spotted a lot sooner, saving their lives potentially. So I just thought that's, a really amazing use of Xamarin with machine learning. Another quick one I want to show you is mobile chest X-ray. So this was actually done by some interns at Microsoft Garage, which is their R&D department. They built a chest X-ray app with machine learning and Xamarin. So if we just zoom in on this picture, so what this does is you can either take a photo or import a photo, and you can have a look at mobile X-rays, and it will do some analysis on it. So in this case, it spotted pleural thickening. So you imagine somewhere in like the developing world, for example, they might have access to medical staff who are qualified to take the X-ray, but they might not have access to staff who are able to analyze these images accurately, because a consultant who's qualified in chest and heart and all those things, cardiothoracic, they might not be there in a rural area where a doctor's visiting. And so this means that a doctor that's not qualified in these areas can take an app like this and analyze his X-rays. So it's just yet again a way where you could save lives and make medical assistance more accessible by using technology with Xamarin and machine learning. So it's just a couple of examples I wanted to show you, because I just think it's super cool. I'll share links later to these, so that if you do want to have a look more into them, by all means that you can. If we just jump back to the slides, so let's just have a look. There we go. So we've seen the amazing examples. So this is just my very poor World Your Oyster picture. But yeah, literally, there's so many things you could do with it beyond just a counter or doing some body language analysis. But certainly for me, I don't write code as much as I'd like to these days, and so I really love how approachable Cognitive Services is to get started. So today you've learnt what Xamarin is, you've seen how to get started, you've seen examples in 2 languages, and you've also discovered how we can use cloud computing with Cognitive Services to do some really cool things. And with that, thank you, and I'm open to questions if anyone has any.
Thank you so much, Luce. So much covered in the session there. It was insane. And you even had some fun with your demos, so that's always nice to see.
Yeah, it's all right. You get used to it. You have to make a sacrifice in the morning, really. I forgot.
We don't have any questions specifically, and we are just about out of time. But is there anything you wanted to give us around where people can get started? Where's the right place to go and get started?
So the best place to go, if I just jump back to the browser I had open a minute ago, is if you just go to Xamarin.com, of all places. There is it's a really good set of resources when it loads. But as you'll see when it loads, it gives you some access to the Microsoft Learn modules on Xamarin, which is all free. There's also a lot of video content. So on Channel 9 and the Microsoft Developer YouTube channel, there's also a Xamarin Developer YouTube channel. So there's a lot of content out there. On the slides, I included my Twitter handle, which is @LuceCarter1. If you keep an eye on that today, I will share out a link to a lot of useful things. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so you've got, let's just zoom in a bit. Yeah, so you've got the Learn, you've got access to documentation, there's blogs. There's a whole page dedicated to how you can get started. So you can learn more, you can...
That's awesome, Luce.
There's so much content, and I'll share out some links throughout the day for anyone that's interested to learn more.
We have an ongoing hashtag, so if everybody wants to watch that, I'm sure Luce will include that in her post.
Yep, absolutely.
And we can all keep track of this data. So thank you so much, Luce. That was an excellent session and really good to see.
Thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome. Next up is going to be Neil Hamley. We're going to be looking at Azure Security Fundamentals. Neil is in the group and will be sharing his screen shortly to prepare us for a 10 o'clock kickoff. Neil, could you share your screen with your first slide so that we have something on the screen for people to see? Marvelous. Thank you, Neil.
Okay, excellent.
Oops, I think you've shared your whole desktop.
Yeah, no, I was going back to make sure I was unmuted.
Okay.
I've got a couple of screens running today due to the hosting, so just going to.
Okay, I would switch to a holding slide, but we are close to the start of your session.
Excellent. So I'll hold that until we get started at the top of the hour, so another minute or so.
Thank you. For everybody that's on the call, welcome to the Global Azure Virtual. This is track 1. I'll be posting in the chat in a moment links to jump off to track 2 and track 3 should you want to dip into another session. Although here we've got the marvelous Neil Hamley coming up next. So do take your pick of which sessions you want to be in, but we are all available today to help you out should you have any issues connecting to any of the technology. Also, if you could ask questions in the meeting chat as we go, that allows us to then either interrupt the presenter if it's something particularly pertinent to where they are, or to ask them at the end. So thanks for taking part in this event, and let us know if you have any issues.
Just to jump in there, Sharon, sorry, just make people aware that there is no content on track 3 at 10 a.m. So our next session, there's only this one, or I believe track 2 is Amy Boyd doing data, machine learning stuff that she did on data from Love Island.
Okay, I think the track 3 may play a video during that gap.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
I will be quiet and I'll mute my microphone. Have a great session, everyone.
Okay, so according to my clock, I hope that's roughly on time. It is now 10 o'clock, so we will get started. So welcome everyone, welcome to another Azure Global Azure event. We are going to be doing the live sessions today, so we've had a couple of days of some presentations that have been pre-recorded, and today we're going into the live ones. So welcome, and hopefully you're going to enjoy one or more sessions today. Mine is the Azure Security Fundamentals. So this is kind of just taking us through, for those who are kind of unfamiliar with Azure or kind of even security concepts, what we can kind of do within the Azure world. Let me kind of introduce myself and who I am. So as you can see from the slide, my name is Neil Hambley. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I'm a consultant kind of and architect with the Azure and data platforms for many, many years now. So I'm getting on a little bit now. Starts with a 50 kind of ish in the time zone now for my birthday. So I'm also one of those that teach a lot of different courses from Microsoft. These are the mock courses. So that's the Microsoft official curriculum. And one of those specifically ones is the security. So not that many of us do this, but it's a 4-day AZ 500 and it's all around the security capabilities inside Azure. So I've been around for quite some time in the community. I've been doing this for probably 12, 13 years of presentations, something like 400 or so presentations for the community. And I run my own kind of Microsoft partner. So I'm a kind of training provider, a consultant, and we also do lots and lots of training. And I do like my films, whiskey, and dancing. So let's get started on what we're covering today. This is an introduction session. So we're kind of doing a 100 level beginner type material. We're going to look at the security capabilities and tooling with inside Azure, how we can create secure solutions on a very secure Azure platform. We're going to explore some of those kind of, introduction topics. We're not going to cover everything because clearly security is a vast topic and we've only got a 15-minute kind of slide time frame here. But we will share some information and the slides can show you where you can get a ton more of information as you go through and learn about Azure and specifically about security. So the way I've kind of focused this today is into 6 different lessons. We're going to kind of walk away through that, and we're going to start off with introducing you to the Azure portal and some of the security services, and we're going to touch on some terminology or acronyms that we might use when we're discussing the security concepts. We're going to move into then what's known as security and defense. So defense in depth, where we have a number of different kind of boundary levels, and we're going to explore that and show you what that's all about and why that's important in terms of having that deployed within your kind of your mindset and also the way you approach security. We're then going to touch on a specific set of kind of service and tooling. So we've got the Azure Security Center and Azure Monitoring, and we're going to look at what we can do, how we can establish what security we have, how well that's been deployed, what's our kind of posturing for security, how we can improve that as well. Then we're going to start talking about a few of the kind of key concepts. So virtual networks, some subnets and network security groups is one of the topics I specifically picked out today, as well as firewalls, routing and endpoints. There's a ton more that we're not going to cover purely down to the amount of time that we have. But I'm going to show you some other resources and where you can go and learn about the kind of security and Azure in general as well. So as I say, let's get started with lesson 1. So this is about the Azure portal. This is our kind of our interface to talk to and work with provision of services. So we're going to explore that shortly. And we're going to look at some key acronyms and terminology first, and then we're going to step into the portal. So let's have a quick look at what we have in front of us. So there's quite a few kind of acronyms here, but kind of just want to make aware of a few of them and kind of just talk through very quickly. So we have things like IaaS, the infrastructure as a service, PaaS, platform as a service, and SaaS, software as a service. So essentially, we're doing lots of service-related operations inside of Azure. We have technology kind of acronyms like VNet, Virtual Network, NSG, Network Security Group. So if you're not familiar with these, don't worry too much, but essentially I just kind of put this list together. But we will be kind of talking through these a little bit as we go through. So we have things like fully qualified domain name, kind of how do we know what system and service we're trying to connect to. So we need to have a kind of an address like you would for where you live. We need to be able to tell kind of the system that it's at this location. We have things like RBAC, which is role-based access control, to give us a fine level set of controls around who has access to those resources. So there's a few more on there, but we're going to kind of walk straight into what is the Azure portal. So first off, we're going to know the URL, which is HTTPS. So it's a very secure socket kind of into that portal, and it's portal.azure.com. Now, when we go in there, depends on the rights that we're logging in with. So what identity are we using depends on what we'll be able to see once we're in there. So I'm going to jump into one of my now. I'm just going to escape out of the presentation and jump us to where we have some slides, some screens. So first off, I'm going to go into my environment. I'm just going to get to the right one sec. Making sure I've got them all up, good. And I've got a number of screens here. So I'm just going to first log out of this environment and log back in so you can see the full kind of experience of what it is. So I'm going to go to the main kind of portal.azure URL. So we kind of get rid of that for a second and type portal.azure.com. And it's going to ask me to authenticate. So this is one of the first things we do with security is we have an identity. Now, this identity is one that's in my Azure Active Directory tenant, and I'm kind of going to use a username and password. So here's my username, and here's my password. And effectively, that's then going to authenticate me into the Azure portal. Now, there's a number of other kind of parts to that. We have Azure Active Directory we're going to look at a little bit later on. But essentially, what I've got now is I've come in and I've actually directly gone to a specific what's known as a kind of dashboard that I created that has some cool information about kind of what my security kind of concepts might be, as well as some things like quick start tutorials. Now, on the left-hand pane, I'm just going to quickly explore this portal for you. I'm going to kind of show you where we can go and learn about a lot of new information, as well as where you might want to do your own guided tour later on. But kind of on the left-hand side, we have sometimes what's known as kind of the views where we can kind of see all of the kind of quick kind of access links. So this is my favorites, and I've got kind of ability to jump into the different resources. So I want to go look at my resource groups. I can just click on that link. I can see all the resource groups I have, what SQL databases might be deployed, and ones we're going to go and look at specifically in more detail today is around security. So this portal itself has the ability to not only kind of use a user interface, but we can also kind of spin up what's known as a cloud shell. And this is a command line interface, and we have a couple of options like the bash script and the PowerShell. So if you want to kind of run some of your scripting to create your resources, we have the ability to come and do that natively within inside the portal and not have to step out to another interface. So in this environment here, there's a dashboard. I'm going to want to kind of maybe go and jump in to look at one of my resource groups that I created that has some examples of the network capabilities, the security we might want to go and configure, and how we kind of work out how to do things and configure things within inside the environment. We'll come and do this a little bit later in the session today, come back and look at how I created this. In addition to that, I've got some additional kind of tabs here with the same information, but I've focused in on some of the things around the security. So what recommendations might be recommended? We're going to look at security score and the security center later on, and how we can improve maybe some of the capabilities by looking through and seeing if there's additional steps that we might want to do, and if they're quick fixes or if they're additional kind of more involved steps that actually require remediation. We have to follow instructions to get to where we need to be. Okay, so I'm going to come back and look at a few examples later on of this, but this is some of the built-in functionality inside of Azure that allows us to do the security. Okay, so that's a quick demo. We'll come back into a few of these later on. Let's go back to the slides for a second. I'm going to resume from where we were. Okay. So lesson 2 is about security and defense. Now, this is where we kind of have a number of responsibilities that ourselves and then Microsoft are going to work as a kind of team to provide the security. So let's have a quick look at kind of maybe how you're doing things outside of the Azure world, where you are responsible for all of the requirements of security. So that's securing your data centers, the physical kind of access to those data racks and those servers. You're kind of responsible for all of the operating system and network controls. So you can see on the screen here, we kind of have a kind of a drop down of all the different kind of responsibilities. And as we go through and look at these different services, maybe like the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, the requirements to what you're responsible for and what Microsoft are taking ownership of in terms of security can vary. But you're ultimately, at the end of the day, always going to have a level of responsibility. So your data governance and rights, your client endpoints and access, so who you're giving rights to allow to access those resources is always going to be in your camp. But some of the other responsibilities may be taken over by Microsoft. For example, when you do software as a service, like the Office 365 and some of the other services, whereas if you're doing infrastructure as a service, you're kind of responsible for the OS and other controls inside of that VM. Defense in depth is about kind of separation between the kind of requirements of physical security. How do I get kind of control around that? So, you know, for the Azure data centers, there's a lot of kind of security around that. It's, you know, secure environments. They have, you know, very heavy restrictions on who can actually enter that building and for what purpose. And there's a very few people who actually were able to get into those data centers. Once you get in there, you're actually going to also need to kind of have an identity and access rights to be able to try and get access to those resources. So that's the next tier down. We're going to be able to kind of have to prove who we are. So maybe like a username and password, and maybe some additional kind of access through maybe a multi-factor authentication, where you're also potentially using something like your fingerprint to validate that you're who you say you are. The perimeter, where you're also going to have kind of other controls, and this is where we kind of maybe we start talking about, you know, the ability to be able to connect to those services. So if I can't get into that service and I can't, you know, connect to it through kind of maybe a virtual network, etc., then I've not got the ability to be able to try and access the resources inside that. So by controlling the perimeter, you know, cages to racks, for example, is one example, but also being able to connect to that virtual machine because my IP address, etc., is one that is in on the allowed list. The network is really kind of where most people start thinking about security, but we have kind of tiers of security before that. But network is, if I can't connect to that service, I can't authenticate into maybe the Azure Active Directory. I can't also, you know, provide the right credentials and the right passwords and other security controls, then I'm not going to be able to connect to that network. And not connecting means I can't do anything with those resources. Computers are another option, and think about it in this way. If we have, so I'm going to, we actually have a request to turn off my camera. Okay, one sec. Let me just go back to my other entry and just turn off. Yeah, my camera is off. Okay. So the compute essentially is, let's say we have a VM and the VM is running, we'll be able to run code. But if the VM is turned off, maybe it's stopped for some reason, you know, other weekends and evenings or other kind of reasons why it's off, we need those resources. We can't run code, we can't execute on that without having the ability to access that compute. So compute, and there's a large number of VMs, there's over 200 different kind of sizes, you know, but if we're not able to connect to that compute, then effectively we can't run. It's like, you know, you come to your machine and you turn it on and, oh, the battery's dead, so I can't use my laptop. Or the power's gone and we don't have a power supply backup. So we need to be able to have that compute, and that compute is very scalable in Azure, which is fantastic. It means that we can kind of turn those services on, we can scale them up and down as we need, but without compute, we are kind of stopped. The application, this is then where you are deployed applications, for example, something like maybe like SQL Server into your VM, and you're trying to run that. So the application is not configured with the right access rights, etc., and the application is not kind of in the right zone and right location. It has access to the storage and other resources it needs. Then it's not going to be able to kind of connect to the kind of the final kind of tier. The bit we're trying to protect is the data. Now, data also can be protected in a number of ways. One of the key ways there is encryption, in that we can kind of make sure that even if we kind of get through all those other security layers, when we get to data, if it's encrypted and we don't have the right encryption keys, etc., we are going to be stuck there. So that's kind of the defense in depth, is that we're having some separations so that you may be able to kind of you know, get through and you know, get into a few of those kind of network tiers or kind of the security tiers, but you may not get to the network one, and that's kind of then a level or below that you can't get any further. Okay, so we're now going to start looking into the main kind of services available. And the ones I've chosen to focus on today is something called Azure Security Center. And we also have monitoring. So the technologies that we have inside of Azure are very much kind of you know, dependent on the other services. So the fabric layer service that we have, and lots of other kind of storage tiers, etc. A lot of these services are interconnected in a huge way. And so when we kind of look at Azure Security Center, we don't have to do a lot of plumbing. It's already kind of done for us. We can just kind of open up that service and we can go and see what's all that's about. So let's look through a couple of slides first, and then we're going to go and look at that in a bit more detail around kind of that in the portal. So first off, what is the Security Center? Well, first off, it's a kind of a security management system that's built into the Azure kind of infrastructure. It allows us to strengthen our security posture, to protect that data set, those key assets that we have inside our environments. Now, there's lots of different types of kind of services and offerings within inside of kind of Azure. So from compute and apps, networking, data and storage, etc., and identity access. But essentially, each of those we kind of separate into a kind of different group, and we can kind of look at those individually and work out how well or not so good we might have in terms of the security around that, etc. Okay, 1 second. It's gonna see we have a message here. Okay, good. So as you can see here on this example, we have a policy and compliance, a resource security hygiene, and a threat protection. So each one of those has given us some indication about how well we're kind of performing, you know, what's our rating in that area, and is there areas of recommendations that we can improve. So clearly kind of red is not good, and we have a few kind of showing in the red category here, medium and low severity. So we kind of want to figure out how to improve that score. 461 of that at 870 isn't probably the best score in the world, obviously. So we may want to kind of, over time, improve that and also kind of find our weakest link, essentially. So we're going to use something called this overall score, secure score, I should say. It's a fairly new feature that's been brought out, but it allows us to kind of understand what subscriptions we're using. So if you're not familiar with kind of Azure terminology like subscriptions or resource groups, there's something called the Azure Fundamentals. We're going to show you where you can kind of go and learn more about that in the Microsoft Learn services. But essentially, we can see at each subscription, this is kind of who's paying for that kind of set of resources that you employed. And inside of that subscription, we can have one or more resource groups. So we will kind of start at a very high tier, kind of the 5,000 kind of foot view, and say, for all the resources that belong to this subscription, how well is my security score? And I can then drill down into further details. I may also have things like regulatory compliance that I need to actually achieve within inside of my business to actually kind of be part of that industry. So we may be kind of, obviously one is GDPR, there's some around kind of the Finance Acts and kind of different kind of compliance algorithms, depends on where you are in the world and what kind of country you live in, who you kind of have to adhere to compliance with. So we can go and look at some of those as well, and that helps with that. We're going to look at that a little bit more detail and go in to look at kind of how we improve that and look at some recommendations and how quickly we can improve that score and track that over time as well. There's a number of additional kind of Azure Security Center capabilities. Some of these are called policies and alerts. So essentially we have the ability to notify when breaches or other security policies are kind of being not met. And we can kind of track those. We can also have security incidents detected through the policies and through the alerts that we have. And we can see kind of how often, what kind of severity there might be. So are they low, medium, or high severity? And really kind of also then track that down to kind of where that attack's coming from. So when was it detected? What are the steps that we can do? How were they trying to attack that system? Is it a brute force RDP attack, for example? Now, the security admin and other people that have been given that specific security role, we're able to kind of access these kind of screens and look at these information. And there's also steps we can take to prevent that directly within inside this tool. There's so much to really show. I'm going to show a few more screens here and then we're going to dip into it. But basically, we have a large number of ways of evaluating, understanding our security posture. What is our compliance? What are our numbers? What's our threats levels, etc. But also kind of what resources do we have? So we can maybe look at our virtual networks, our VMs inside that, our subnets, and other things like firewalls and other information, and really kind of start to improve that. Now, generally, this is somebody who will kind of have a security role, will kind of be controlling all of this and responsible. But security is something that everyone has a responsibility for. It's not just, that's job is for Jeff over there. No, we all have a requirement to kind of think about security. And you'll see time and time in the news, literally all the time, about the breach of this kind of company. And they kind of, 200 million kind of records have been kind of breached. People are constantly trying to find this information. There's lots of hackers out there, lots of people that are trying to do bad things. So kind of, we don't want these bad actors getting access to our systems. And if they try to, we have enough security in place to be able to kind of thwart their activities. And they always go on to an easier target. They're not going to spend a lot of time trying to get into your system if it's heavily guarded. So we want to kind of find out what type of risk we might have and how we can improve that. So this is what we're going to be using the Security Center for again. So I'm going to go kind of, before we go into the next section, I'm going to go and show you the Security Center itself and some more information. Let's skip out of the presentation again and go over to this one here. Oops, sorry, wrong one. This one here. So Security Center. So if we go into the Microsoft Azure, we can see that we have a couple of kind of links. I can do it from the dashboard I've created, but I'm going to go down to this left-hand pane and go down to the bottom where it has like this icon called Security Center, and there's some kind of requirements there. If you click on it, hover over it, you get some quick links into free training and other useful links. But I'm just going to click into it and come into the Security Center itself. Now, you may notice at the top, it's kind of saying that we have 8 subscriptions. So I have multiple subscriptions on this specific environment. And I'm going to go and kind of look at a quick look. There's also a chronic started kind of a link there, so that actually kind of helps understand, and also where you can kind of upgrade, install agents, and kind of just get started with learning about the capabilities of Azure Security Center. Okay. There's some pricing and settings. We can actually see kind of what level of kind of standard tier or free tier or partial tier. So I've set these up to kind of show you that we have different pricing tiers and different costs. There's a community as well, so you learn more about some templates that might exist and the community GitHub that's there. And there's some workflow automation, which we're not going to spend time going into today, but just to make you aware that kind of there's capabilities around the workflow of creating the kind of security stuff. What I want to spend time on today is looking at our coverage. So here I can see that we have a number of subscriptions. Some of these are not fully protected, so it kind of does kind of advise. So you can see which ones are not covered. There are all covered. There's 3 partially covered, and here's the ones that are fully covered. Okay. I'm going to go actually to one that's actually partially covered, and I can see this one here. I can see the subscription. I can see as the owner, and I can also go and edit that plan and work out which tier I want to be on and whether I've got these specific kind of resources, and if there's additional pricing for that. Okay, so this is where you kind of find that level of information to set your pricing. This is where we're going to spend some of our time today, is secure score. Clearly, I don't have time to go through every single component here, but I'm going to focus on this one. I'm going to take the top one here. And this is a specific subscription then. So I remembered I said that we have multiple subscriptions. I'm seeing in this subscription what kind of resources. And I've got a lot of unhealthy stuff here. And that's not great for me. I need to kind of figure out how to improve that. Okay. So I'm going to go look, and we can see kind of in order of kind of some of the resources and also the point score. So everything has to be scored today. We're trying to kind of get that highest point score. We want to kind of secure it as much as we can. So I'm going to look at kind of some of those capabilities. So here might be an example is I've already got a couple of steps completed, but there's one that actually isn't completed, which is this step here. MFA, which is multi-factor authentication, should be enabled. So it's telling me for this control group, kind of, there's one that I need to maybe work on. If I clicked on it, I could see exactly what is the resource. I can see any remediation steps I might want to do. You see there's quite a few steps there. So we're not going to kind of go and fix those right now, but essentially it gives you all that. And it also kind of tells you how bad, what the impact might be, and more information about that. So there's a useful one there, but let's go look at ones we can actually kind of maybe fix easily enough. Okay. So if I go to secure management ports, I've got one already completed. I've got my NSG. We're going to look at those shortly. Management port should be closed on you. So I haven't got that one sorted, and I need this quick fix. You know what? I'm going to just quickly kind of click into that one. And I'm going to choose the VM that I created in the sample. And the demos, all those steps for creating these, by the way, are in this slide deck as well. I'm just going to click remediate. It's going to say, yeah, okay, so all I need to do is I need to kind of click on save. It's just doing the just in time. So there's a concept of we're only going to give you the rights to do what you need to do as and when you need them, and then we're going to kind of revoke that. So essentially, we're kind of operating with what's known as the zero trust model. So we don't trust anything. That's kind of the new kind of paradigm we're using for everything. We're going to give you rights when you need it, and then we're going to take them away when you finish using those. So if somebody comes behind you and are trying to attack that resource, they've got no kind of rights to go and kind of trying to kind of elevate to. So this one's doing its work now. Kind of wait for that to finish, and it started that configuration. So we'll come back and look at that a little bit later on. So there's others there you can see here that we walk down through. Let me kind of look at another example. There's auditing on SQL Server should be enabled. Again, another quick fix. Let me kind of turn this on, remediate that. I'm going to say, yeah, I want 365. I'm going to remove these resources later anyway. But essentially, this is now also a very, very quick step. So you can kind of look through and see all of the very quick things you can do and be able to kind of start improving your security. But we also can categorize it into, you know, different categories of, this is around the recommendations that should be for audits and logging. We want to log what's happening in our SQL servers, because if things are bad happening in there, we've got then a record of what's happening. And those security logs are going to be in a secure storage account inside of Azure that has security around it, so that somebody can't go behind and try and kind of, you know, cover up their tracks, for example. So there's lots of different kind of options around kind of sorting out these capabilities. So didn't want to click on that. Apologies. So we kind of will come back and look at some of these ones we fixed earlier and see if we can get it. But one of the things I like to do is to download my CSV report. And what this does is kind of give me a current point in time, how well my score is. And also if I go and open up that score, I can see kind of this information. Now it's a CSV file, so it lends itself quite nicely maybe to being imported to something like Power BI. And I can create my reports off that. I do have some of those for some of my private clients that I kind of work with, and we built specific Power BI reports to be able to kind of look at our security concepts and share that with a wider audience, because you don't want to give everyone access to your security kind of information, because again, you want to secure that, but we want to maybe have some management reporting capability. So we kind of take some of this information and highlight that and make those into reports. But we have a CSV that is a time component. You can see when we exported it. And I can maybe do this on a weekly basis and maybe kind of have those those management boards where we go to and understand what we're changing in the environment. And this is, where I'd probably bring this information to. So this is kind of some high level stuff for the security center. Let's go back and look at some more information. So the security hygiene recommendations, this breaks us down. We can kind of see that list there. We can also jump that into specific kind of VMs or cloud services we might be running, or things like containerization. So depends on what we have available to us and what's in our environment, we can kind of go and focus it in on those resources here. And I can also go and add additional servers and onboard servers into my environment as well, and maybe install a monitoring agent and have my on-premises systems as well already kind of added to that as well. Network is probably the one that we want to kind of maybe spend some time in focusing on. I can see I have one VM. I've got a healthy VM, but there may be some additional kind of things that you want to do. And we've got internet-facing virtual machines. Should be protected with just-in-time access control. Yes, please. It's red. It means it's not fixed. I'm going to fix that now. And I'm going to my healthy resources. I can see that I kind of have that already. So we can kind of see the steps. We can see what we're trying to do. I think I'm kind of waiting for this to update because I added that remedial step earlier. Okay. Sorry, distracted sneeze there for a second. Okay, I'm going to go into the network map. We only got one kind of entry here, so kind of it's not a great deal, but you will probably have a lot more to show on here. And we have a few different ways of kind of seeing the views of this information. And we can see kind of, topology and allowed traffic views as well. And we can see maybe if we're going to kind of filter into missing NSGs or dynamic denial of service offerings and that kind of stuff. So we want to kind of figure out how to kind of improve it by looking at some maybe the network map. And also we have a VNet view. Now, virtual network is kind of one of the key concepts we're going to look at next. And we're going to go and look at kind of my virtual network. This is the example that I created up for today. And, we can see here that there is really nothing much to be looking at the moment, but I may have some recommendations on some of my networks that need to be fixed. Okay, so that's kind of a quick kind of view into the security center, how it's running. Let's go back to the PowerPoint slides and move into the next section. So virtual networks, we just touched on that very quickly. We're going to explore this a little bit more detailed now. So what is a virtual network? Well, it's one of the fundamental building blocks we have. It's essentially a container of kind of your resources, your VMs and other services that essentially securely can be kind of controlled about the traffic in and out of that. So we call this a virtual network. We can control access through IP addresses, through our firewalls. We will probably use something like Azure Active Directory and RBAC, which is role-based access control, to give us fine-based control of that data. Essentially, there's some best practices about how you do this. You want a few large VNets rather than lots of smaller networks. You're going to want to reserve some of that space for future use. So kind of, when you create your VNet and you've got a number of IP addresses, maybe you've got 65,000 IP addresses, you're going to create a few subnets for maybe some of the sections. We're going to show some diagrams shortly on that. And what we're going to then do is kind of maybe leave a few of those IP addresses for future assignments. Okay. And we can kind of also use something called network security groups to secure our VNets and our subnets beneath that. So kind of when we apply our policies and our kind of rules of kind of security, so this is what the network security groups is going to do. It means that we can kind of have a single or few different groups, and we can apply that to multiple virtual networks. So virtual network can be created with inside either the portal. We can also use PowerShell or Azure command line interface CLI to secure that. And then we can have the ability to communicate with the internet if we want public facing access into that VNet. We can communicate with other Azure resources like storage, databases, etc. And we can also communicate with on-premises resources. Each one of these, by the way, in the links here takes you to a specific kind of Azure document about more details about how to do those. We also can filter and route our traffic in and out of the VNet. And we can also what's known as network peering into other VNets. So you might have a virtual network in Europe, and you might have another virtual network in the US. They're in different regions. We might do a network peering between those. So we won't go into a lot of details about that. There are some limits about the number of resources you can do and kind of, but there's some links there to show you what those are. And we also have something called a private or service endpoint that allows us to kind of secure into specific ports and types of services, like connecting to a SQL Server database that's as a service running in Azure from a VM that we might have in that VNet. I'm going to show you an example of that. So I've already kind of created these resources because they do take a few minutes to build up, not too long, but it's maybe half an hour's worth of effort. But I'm going to go and show you those quick start kind of steps. So these are the steps that we went through. We created our virtual machine. When we did that, we also created our virtual network, and we created a resource group to go with that. So all the steps I have listed here, I've done, and I'll show you those steps and resources. We also created a SQL database server, and then I created what's known as a private endpoint. Now this allows me to, from the VM that I've created, to connect the secure to that SQL database server within inside that VNet. And I kind of have a very secure connectivity to that. I'm going to be able to jump into that VM with a remote desktop. I've already done that, and I'm going to go show you that in a few seconds. And then we can access that SQL database privately from inside the VM, and there's some links there to clean up the example. So let's go and have a look at the example there. So what I'm going to do is, if I can remember where the steps are for it, I think it's here. So here's my quick start. So is it this one? That's on the other one. Okay. Okay, so this was the specific kind of example that we just created. So these are all the steps. We created the VM. So I created just a specific VM with a certain size. So this is my compute. This is kind of where I'm going to connect using some PowerShell and some a SQL Server Management Studio connection. I created my virtual network and I gave it these information. So I gave it a resource group name, virtual network name, which region. So I went with East US because that's probably one of the stronger regions that we have out there in Azure. I gave it a IP address and a range of IP addresses. So this gives /16, give me 65,000 IP addresses. I've given it a subnet range, and I've kind of created a smaller subnet, and I've given it 256 addresses from that 65,000. I've created the resources. I've created my virtual machine. I've set all kind of the settings there. I've created my database server. I've created my private endpoint, and I've created the connected with my remote desktop VM. So let's go and have a look at the resources there. So what we did is I'm going to go into my resource groups and show you that I created this resource group as per the instructions. Here's the one we're looking at. I'm just going to minimize that for a second. So this is all the resources that it created. The ones that kind of obviously we're kind of interested in is probably the network security group, the network kind of interface, so this one here, and other information like the endpoint, etc. But I'm going to go and kind of jump into the VM. So the VM I've already kind of created. If I click on that, I did the connect. I've got my RDP file, which is allowing me to connect into that RDP. And I've already done that jump to kind of save time. And what I've done is I'm doing a quick kind of lookup on a specific IP address, or sorry, a specific fully qualified domain name, and getting the information about where this was deployed, etc. What I've then done is I'm also using the same URL. So let me just do the connect. And you'll see that we have the kind of fully qualified domain. So this is my SQL server. And it's connecting to the server as opposed to connecting to the SQL database, as you'll see there. So I've created a SQL server rather than a SQL database. And I've got something called my database, which I've created inside that. It has no real data in it, but I'll just be able to connect to that resource. So what I'll do is I can see kind of, I've connected into that VM. I've got a public IP address of the VM. I've done an RDP into that, and I can see that everything's kind of working. Let me go and look at the security controls around that in Azure. So if I come back into my resource group, and I'm going to go to my SQL server, notice that what we have is, obviously ability to create databases and lots of other stuff. But I have my server name, which is what I've connected to. And I'm going to show my firewall settings. I can see that I have these settings at the moment. I don't have any rules applied. I'm not allowing other services to be kind of accessed. So, sometimes you might see this set on. I'm leaving that on. I've just got everything kind of set up like this. Now, when I first set this up without the private endpoint, this wouldn't allow me to connect into this server. I created my private endpoint to connect the dots essentially for this. So this is under the firewalls and virtual networks. Here's my private endpoint that I created. And this essentially has been approved. And I could obviously go and reject that private endpoint, and I could lose my connection. There's other things around advanced data security inside of the SQL server itself. We won't have time to go into today to do that, but essentially this is another thing around something like advanced threat protection, seeing if things are trying to be done against your servers, and we can kind of run scans and have those scans set to sent to us. But we're not going to go into details of this today. I'm going to go into the main resource group. I'm going to go into the one we looked at, and I'm going to go down to the quick start. So not where I want to be, that one will be here, there. I want to go into my network security group. So this is kind of where the rules of kind of who can come in on what type of protocol, so TCP, kind of others, what ports are allowed in. So I've allowed the RDP port 3389 to be able to do a remote connection into that, and all of that information. And then there's some additional security just-in-time rules that got applied that kind of then weren't there earlier until I turned on that just-in-time capability, and this got added this morning. Okay, I can go and see what my inbound security rules are, my outbound, what network interfaces I have, what the public and private IP addresses are, and what it's bound to. So in this case, a virtual machine. I'm going to go into that, and this is where maybe I can then start seeing additional information about kind of the configurations of those services, whether I've got IP forwarding. But generally, kind of these are kind of where you go and find these levels of information. Let me go to my network, my inbound security rules. So I can see kind of how I have free inbound, but no outbound. I'm not allowing traffic back out to my system at the moment. I can go and see my network security group logs if I need to see those, and lots of other cool information about these specific services. So some great kind of information. Subnets is kind of, I don't have one, but I can also maybe go and associate a new virtual network and create my subnet and associate that if I wanted to then create a new network security group and I wanted to start binding the specific virtual networks I have and subnets, etc. Okay. So let's go back to the presentation for a second. So that was kind of a quick kind of, we create those services, we can create all the kind of capabilities. If I click onto those links, it will take me through to the various steps here. Okay. So let's go back to the presentation because we're getting close to the end of this presentation. So firewall rules and endpoints. This is essentially the list of who can come in and who. Are you on the list? You know, you go to that nightclub and someone says, are you on the list? And you then say, well, my name is Neil. And he looks on the list and goes, nope. Same thing with services and security. As they say, you need to be on the list. Now, network Azure firewalls are complete stateful firewall services with high availability, unrestricted kind of capacity. They use a static public IP address so we can actually communicate with other public services and know kind of where that. It's fully integrated with Azure monitoring for all our login activities. We have lots of built-in functionality like traffic filtering rules, the ability to do fully qualified domain name tags, threat detection. So kind of, you know, it's kind of that gateway of kind of who's coming in and out. So we kind of use that as a kind of a major component inside of our security there. And we can log all that information as well and go and review that information, and it intersects with the security center, of course. There's another concept we need to kind of be a little bit familiar with is kind of what we call routing. So this is how do we get from where we are, say our VM, to our SQL server, and we're going to have a route. And basically, there's some defined system routes that get built when you create these services. You can't remove or kind of delete those system routes. You can create some optional default routes, and we can also create some custom routes, and they're either user-defined or a board gateway protocol, a BGP. And we then have the ability, if we have multiples, we can kind of determine which ones we're going to use first. Microsoft has a kind of Azure priority list of user-defined routes first, then any border gateway protocols, and then system routes. So if you kind of override your system ones with user-defined routes, etc. This is where you find that information. So in a specific VM, we might go and look at that specific NIC, network interface, and we're going to then kind of see what rules we have around that. But also then you can see if I clicked on network inside of my VM and then clicked on my network interface and went to that specific screen, we could see the effective route. So what is the route table and how does this kind of work and what's active and inactive. So there's a quick kind of visual kind of view of what will be a route table as one for the, at least, you know, example of that for one of the subnets. There's multiple subnets here. And we may have something like a DMZ zone as well. Essentially, we're coming in from the internet. We may go through something like the VPN gateway or through a load balancer or some other kind of a ingestion location. But we're coming into our virtual network. So that virtual network is that 10.00016 address there. We might have multiple. In this case, we've got a few VMs. We've got in our subnet 1, and we've got other applications, maybe like our virtual machines or SQL Server or some other resources. And we have a set of user-defined routes that have been built here. So this is kind of show you, and then you may have another virtual network, say, in a different region, and we're going to do virtual network peering to communicate between those VNets. There's something also called endpoints, which are a way to extend kind of your virtual network private address spaces, and also they are specifically focused around certain types of service like storage and SQL databases and things like the service bus and key vaults and other kind of services like the Azure Data Lake Store for our services in that. So we have the ability to kind of define a service or private endpoint around these capabilities, and that really helps us kind of zone in on what's actually kind of required in terms of security, without having to do lots and lots of kind of configuration around that specifically. And finally, kind of just to wrap up the session today, kind of where do you learn more about this information? So Azure Learn is Microsoft's kind of go-to Microsoft Docs location. You can kind of go in and understand, well, what's this thing resource group Neil was talking about? What's this management group subscription? So go and learn more about kind of that. There's a website called Microsoft Docs, and we can go from there to Microsoft Learn, and we can learn all about these different kind of, and there's a whole bunch of modules. I'm just going to show you that very quickly. And I think there's a whole bunch of other kind of resources, like Ignite Tour has recorded sessions. So I kind of put some links into where that is as well. So it tells me my time is up. So I'm just going to finish off saying that we completed the full kind of set of lessons today. It's going to show you Microsoft Learn, but just before we go, if you have questions, we're going to answer those now. So kind of make sure you put your question in the chat window if you have them, and we'll be able to share that. If you need to get hold of me and you want to kind of communicate, you want some more questions after the session, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, and I've got my email address up there as well. And kind of let's just go and have a quick look at the Microsoft Learn. So Microsoft Learn is this site here. You can get to it from the Microsoft Docs webpage, docs.microsoft.com. Click on Start Learning, and it takes you to this. And if you want to kind of get certified, there's lots of great stuff, but we have lots and lots of modules here. You can click on kind of any of these. I'm just going to go and kind of just type security into the window here. And you see that we have lots of information about what I was talking to you today about. I have some collections in my Microsoft Edge around kind of different things about playbooks and kind of all the documentation. So if you kind of want to go and learn about those, I can share that as well. So I have ability to share you so get in touch if you want kind of my list. Lots and lots of stuff we haven't talked about. And obviously kind of you can go in and start with your Microsoft documentation. And here I've gone down and just chosen under Microsoft documentation and gone down to security, and we have a whole bunch of kind of entry points for that. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for attending. If you were live, go and enjoy the next session. If it's recording, you're watching, then kind of find another recording maybe to look at. And thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your sessions. Let's go check on the questions.
Neil, can I just interject? Yes, we have got a couple of questions that came through on registration. Can I just ask, how do we know if we're following security best practices in Azure?
Excellent question. Thank you for that. So it's one of those kind of, it's quite a broad ranging kind of technology. So the Security Center is probably the best place for going into that to see that, because there is a lot of best practices around that technology. So let me just go into, if I can find it, there we go. This one. Oh, got too many screens, that's my problem. So if I go into the Security Center, which is on the left-hand side of your Azure portal, and essentially you can start with kind of your kind of secure score. But if you go down to any of these sections, what you'll find is it starts giving you lots of kind of helpful hints about how to improve your security score. Okay. Now, if you want to go and learn about it, then Microsoft Learn is the best place to go and kind of start with that journey. If you are really trying to get kind of a good grasp against it, there is a certification called the AZ500, which is the kind of security engineer, and there's a certification around that. But the fundamentals is a good place to start, and then maybe kind of look at certification like this, which is going to be a kind of 4-day paid for certification. So I'm one of the kind of instructors out there that teaches that, and it tells you how to kind of do all these different cool things. Lots of training out there. Microsoft Learn is a good place to start though. And then use the Security Center in Azure to kind of hone in on your specific set of resources that need help.
Thank you so much, Neil. You asked my other question as well, which is which particular track. You showed a lot of learning there, but which particular track is important for DBAs and devs? So I think you answered that one too. Thank you.
Okay, anybody has any certification questions they have, just reach out to me on Twitter or email or LinkedIn, you know, kind of any of those channels I'm available for. And yeah, I really enjoy kind of, security is not one of those ones that kind of gets a lot of love, but actually it's probably one of the most important kind of things we need to get an understanding of. And there's you know, levels of understanding, so you can kind of go and learn that very quickly. Well, I've had an absolute blast. I've loved every minute of it. Thank you for joining. Thanks for all the questions. And we've got 5 minutes before the next session, so I'll kind of I'll end my kind of contribution here, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Neil. That was an excellent session. So much information in there, and I'm sure everybody's benefited from that one.
Thank you,
Coming up next, we have Bob Duffy talking about hybrid BI with the on-premise data gateway, one not to be missed. Again, if anybody has any questions, please do reach out to Neil directly on his Twitter, or come back and ask questions through the group. If anybody's having difficulty getting to chat and wanted to come off mic, mute now and ask questions, please do feel free. But we'll be stopping the screen share and getting ready for Bob Duffy in just 1 second.
Hey guys, Bob here. Just want to check that you can see my camera and stuff.
Yeah, Bob, we are just seeing you on chat. Oh, that's right, we've got the camera. I'm going to stop the recording now to restart it.
Right. That's good. Should I